Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're going to channel some of Andy and Shelley here. Good
Yes.
morning.
Good morning.
Excellent. Thank you. So pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for your time. Hope you're enjoying day 2 of the summit here. Really excited for the next presentation we have. Ryan Rodriguez-Wiggins, Senior Director here at MetricStream, and I have the pleasure and honor of having worked with Sheila for the last 2.5, almost 3 years on their journey at CIBC. Been working with them very closely, worked with them also with Deloitte as a partner during the implementation. So happy to be here and introduce Sheila Larkin, Senior Director, Enterprise Risk Management, Governance, Risk and Compliance at CIBC. The journey's been a long one. It's good, getting a lot of value out of the system. We've heard Michael and others talk about performing with integrity, and I can honestly say the relationship with CIBC has been amazing. Nothing but good work on both sides. Hasn't always been easy. Have had to have difficult conversations, but it's been successful and a lot of good and true work being done. So happy to be here and introduce Sheila. And without further ado, Sheila, the show is yours.
Well, thank you, Ryan, and good morning, everyone. Just a bit of intro. My role is essentially I am the E Grc program at CIBC, so I'm the business lead for it, which there was earlier today with one of the panels, there was discussion about who should lead these implementations. Should it be technology, the business, risk? Going into this program, I felt very strongly that it actually should not be technology-led because we've bought the software. We don't need the technology view. We need the business view, the first line, second line view. So it's landed with risk for the time being. And as I said, my role is leading the overall program. The intent today is I'm just going to give you a little bit of background in terms of our choice to deploy and implement an enterprise program, go through the scope of what we've implemented, our roadmap, what we learned from our first implementation, and sort of what's coming up. Please, at any time, feel free to ask questions. I certainly don't need to be the only one talking here. Overall, I just wanted to give you, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, but we're one of the top banks in Canada. We have a very different banking structure in Canada as compared to the US. We have a number of what we call Schedule A banks and then a few Schedule B. We're very heavily regulated, so we don't have hundreds of different brands of banks. There's basically 7. For us, we've got 4 main strategic business units where there's a lot of focus on growth in the States now. We recently purchased a private bank out of Chicago, so there's a lot of work right now on integrating them. And prior to that, we'd purchased Atlantic Trust, which is a wealth management company. So there is a lot of focus on growth in the States. As I said, there isn't a lot of opportunity right now in Canada because we've got a much smaller population, and so we're looking to the States. We have about 44,000 employees and 11 million customers. There's a lot of, we've had a change in CEO about 3 years ago, and the CEO prior to Victor was very, I'd say he was quite risk averse, and for I think legitimate reasons. We'd come through, not a good time. We were involved with the Enron, and so we had to sort of take a more, I'd say, focused approach on controls, managing our risks, and really not taking any new risks. We came out, of that, pretty much unscathed, and with our CEO now, he's got a much, I'd say, broader and different focus. It's sort of way more focused on the customer and being a client-focused bank. One thing I think that we're very proud of at CIBC is our commitment to communities, We're very strong sponsors of a number of charitable organizations in Canada, and we do a lot of community work as well, and we do get recognized for that. And last year we made an investment of over $45 million Canadian, that would be.
So just on that note, I think just tying it back to what Gunjan was saying, it's great to see a company that is truly living and performing with integrity, right? Not only are you driving good business and successful, but also giving back to the community and
it's and I think it's embedded in the culture there and in our DNA. We're not pressured to do all that CIBC does, but it's certainly out there, and as I said, it is very well recognized. So in terms of how we started on this journey, I would say probably about 5-6 years ago, we had some discussions around, wouldn't it be great to have everyone, governance, all the governance groups, compliance, internal audit, come together and have sort of joint ownerships of programs. And at that time, it was interesting, we got very technology focused. We had demos from a number of companies, and it was all about the technology, not about the people in the process. So I think, in retrospect, we went around about it the wrong way at that point. And as an organization, I don't think we were ready to, I'll say, play in the sandbox together. It was a very siloed organization. Anyway, a couple of years go by. I would say we were using an existing or a technology to support our control testing and deficiency management. We recognized that that was coming to end of life, and rather than just doing a straight lift and shift and let's just deploy, get something that will replace, we took a more strategic view to say, really, as an organization, what makes sense. We know that we have risk assessments that are being conducted throughout the organization in various formats, various rating scales, various times of the year, always hitting the first line though. And we thought, now is really the opportunity to take the approach to get to a point where we can have one platform to support multiple risk assessments and have an integrated and aggregated view of risk across the organization. It doesn't happen overnight. As part of it, we built out a roadmap, which I will get to. But really the idea was to provide, over time, transparency and streamline processes so that we can take away from the effort of consolidating, combining the information, and really get more focused on the analytical component. Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion this week so far about the value of data and what you can do with that data. And if you take away some of the manual efforts and have more data and time to focus on it, that's where some of the power comes. So, I will say, we, in terms of our overall approach, one of the key, and I can't emphasize this enough, is having strong sponsorship from the top of the organization. Without that, you don't have the credibility or the voice to really make your case. So I was very fortunate that very strong sponsorship from our Chief Risk Officer to our head of global operational risk management and to my boss. And even with the recent change in leadership at the senior VP level, that sponsorship has continued and it's supported across the organization. The other thing is to really understand who your stakeholders are, and it's not just about the users, it's about who are the consumers of the information, who are going to provide the inputs, come up with a roadmap, and that actually is going to help to identify who the supporters are, who the detractors are, and what you can do to get the detractors on board. It is, it's a lot of work, and it's an investment up front, and it's something that should be ongoing, but it is really, really key. I will get to the roadmap shortly. That is key. I can't also emphasize the role of communication, and it's not just about emails, but it's getting out there, going to the management meetings, having conversations. people worry about over-communicating. I think this is one area where it actually doesn't hurt to over-communicate, to get the message out as to, this is the program, this is the direction that we're going. The other key, and again, I've heard it mentioned a few times this week, is before anything is establishing the foundational elements. I refer to this sort of as the backbone, the spine of the platform, because that is what drives your ability to integrate the information. It's the common link across whatever modules you deploy without having that common structure. So it's an organizational structure. It's your taxonomies for process taxonomy, risk taxonomy, and it's getting the consensus up front from your key stakeholders as to what those are going to be. Again, a lot of effort up front, but it's worth it, because without it, as I said, you don't have the ability to make the connections across the data. And literally what I'm here to try and really stress is leverage the out-of-the-box functionality. Our view is, we went through a vendor selection, we selected MetricStream. Obviously they are, considered top in this landscape for a reason. So if they've built the system and the processes and the workflows within the application, it's been done for a reason. And so let's leverage that rather than just replicating what we currently do today.
And Sheila, just before you move on, because I think you covered a lot of really good points there. The first being really readiness and the ability to actually take on a program like this. So you mentioned a few years back, you had kind of looked at this and it wasn't the right time, right? So readiness is extremely important in terms of adopting technology. Otherwise, it doesn't matter what vendor you choose, it's going to fail. The other thing I think that you mentioned is really key, is that buy-in. Extremely critical, right? If you don't have buy-in from people, everything else is not gonna be there. And again, technology is only a piece of it, right?
Yeah, I can't. Again, I know it's been mentioned a number of times today, and I said that's I think we didn't succeed a number of years ago. It's because we were so focused on the technology piece and not the people in the process. Without the people in the process, it doesn't matter how sophisticated your technology is, you're going to fail. And the thinking is, it has been, you deploy technology, you flip the switch, and everything's good. It won't work. And so you've got to make sure that you've got the people on board and the processes. And actually, that's sort of a good segue into the roadmap.
And just sorry
to
slowing things down here,
it's
but
okay.
I think it's a lot of good information. So I've heard from some folks here that they've had challenges with libraries, and you mentioned how critical GRC Foundation is. So just to give the audience an idea, I mean, how many months did you spend working on that? Right.
So we spent a couple of months. I will say we had the benefit of already establishing a process and a risk taxonomy that was in use, I'd say, among a smaller user group. So it was, as I mentioned, we had an existing technology that supported our control testing, controls, and deficiencies. So we had that risk and process taxonomy in place. However, we needed to get the buy-in from the other users. So we actually went out and looked at some industry standards and ended up adopting APQC for risk and process taxonomy. I'd say the bigger challenge, again, so it's getting out there, communicating the benefits, because people are get very stuck into, well, that's how we do it today, and we want this language. But if you can promote and say it's not just about this your use case, it's about what this is going to drive going forward in terms of making those linkages. Our bigger challenge was our organizational structures and coming up with a common approach. At CIBC, our organizational structure library, if you want to call it that, has 60,000 org units. So we actually have more organizational units than we do employees. We did not want to.
How does that work?
I don't know. The 2 for 1, depending on what day it is. We did not want to be putting 60,000 organizational units into MetricStream, nor did MetricStream want us doing that. So we had to come up with, basically looking at the way that the bank is structured from a reporting structure. So if we look at our CEO and then his directs and what the different strategic business units are, as well as the functional units, which are the non-revenue, and basically building it out that way, still leveraging the actual organizational units that reside within our org library. But so I should mention, not only was it 60,000 units, but we went to 17 levels within that org structure. So you could be anywhere from level 1, well, there's really only one level 1, down to 16, 17. And it wasn't even consistent. So if we looked at our organizational structure and said, okay, retail banking should be level 2, within our existing org library, it could have been level 4 or 5. So what we decided to do, and with the consensus and buy-in, again, this took a couple months of workshops and looking at the options, is essentially we agreed to 5 levels of organizational units. We would, again, basically align the organizational units to how corporately we were structured, or we are structured, and we ended up putting in about 5,000 org units. We don't use all of them now, but we're also forward-looking in terms of, as we onboard additional use cases, really with respect to, and I'll speak to one of our upcoming use cases is our operational loss data collection. We needed those org units in order to capture those losses. So it wasn't just about the current use case that we were deploying, but let's look forward, and what is it going to look like to try and accommodate that up front rather than rejigging things going forward. So it is effort, but it actually goes a long way to getting the stakeholder engagement and their buy-in in terms of the road forward. Even now, that was work that we did 2 years ago, and now I think people challenge us sometimes in terms of, well, can't we have a risk structure this way? And if there's a valid reason, we will adopt or change. But to date, we haven't been presented with a compelling reason to reorganize the structures that we have. I'll say from a process taxonomy, we go to 2 levels. So we have a process and sub-process. And from a risk, we go to 3 levels. It seems to be working. Even our operational risk is split. We break that down into 15 sub-risks for operational. So any questions on that with respect to coming up with structures? There are available, organized or, structures that are available. As I said, we picked APQC. There's ORX has one. So there are ones that are recognized in industry standards, and they go to various levels of detail. So one of the key things that we also worked on starting 2 years ago, was coming up with our Egr C Roadmap. And the intent was to come up with the, first of all, what are the objectives? And then what are the prioritization criteria that we would apply to define the timeline for rollout, recognizing that, as good as technology is, we can't do everything at once. There's a lot of change management involved, and so we, wanted to make sure that we had a reasonable timeline and enough time built in for each use case to be deployed. So, the high-level objectives are pretty straightforward. In terms of the criteria, I'll expand on some of them. And what also to keep in mind is with the roadmap is it's not a one-time exercise. So once we did our initial applying the prioritization criteria and we came up with our initial roadmap, it's already changed 3 times. Because business priorities change. There might be new regulatory pressure to automate or make things more efficient. So it's a living and breathing topic that needs to be refreshed on an ongoing basis, and that is one of my sort of key priorities as well, is to make sure that we keep our eyes on it. So, a couple things to keep in mind. Technology sunset, obviously, if you're running on a platform that is end of life, vendor's not going to support, or even if it's internal, that is one of the top priorities. Enterprise versus department needs. Again, I've heard it brought up a few times this week, and I think a really good example is issues management or deficiency management. There are a number of organizations that do have, programs in place, but they're, again, in silos. Some might be in Excel, some might be, in an Access database, Word. This is a really good opportunity to bring that together onto one platform, and it's huge from a benefit perspective, because if you can get all your deficiencies or issues into one central location, you have such greater transparency into what the nature of those are, and to really see if there's anything more systemic than what you see as your one individual issue. With external and internal findings, obviously, with being a bank, we're heavily regulated. If our regulator tells us that we need to do something, we need to do it. And it's not that when I talk about internal or external findings, it's not that they come and say you need to enhance your process. If there's a specific requirement that they've said you need to automate, then that will get the focus. And then the other thing is I'm going to call it program maturity. I had previously referred to it as process maturity, but without a mature program or methodology, and then an ensuing mature process, it's really difficult to automate that. So I've been, I'm very vocal about that we will not automate a broken process. I've had a number of people come to me and say, oh, this group, needs to do this. And I'm like, okay, well, do they have an established process? What are the requirements? Oh, I don't know. I just know that it's not working. And I'm like, well, it's not, as we say, GIGO, so garbage in, garbage out. You need to be well established in your program. We can help, but it's really key to make sure that it's not something that's broken or in its infancy.
All really good points. I think just highlighting some of the things we hear is people have a plan in place and they put together a program or they have a roadmap and they always want to stick to it, and hey, when is the end point, right? I think you mentioned it, and this is part of what we discuss all the time, is it's a journey, right? Yeah. It's changing. So it should be a living, breathing document, as you mentioned, and being able to reassess where you are as you grow and change is extremely critical.
Absolutely. So I'm going to show you what, for illustration purposes only, what a roadmap could possibly look like. So you'll see the foundational elements is in green at the end there. That's what and ICR, sort of our control repository that we replaced. Up next is regulatory change management. Just an example, regulatory change management, when we first built out the roadmap, was further out, about sort of end of more to like 2 years out, but with some changes in AML requirements, it got accelerated. The other thing that changed is RCSA, our risk control self-assessment. That actually was on plan to be next. As we were going through the requirements, though, again, an example of we have a program in place, but we weren't at a point where we didn't want to do just a lift and shift of our current program. It's not something that's loved across the organization. So we decided we really need to take a step back and be more thoughtful in terms of what is our vision for that program. So as a result, we've pushed that out and we accelerated our op-loss data collection. So as I said, and as Ryan mentioned, this is living, breathing, and this is something that goes to our steering committee to get their approval for the changes. So it's making sure you just stay on top of what is going on in the business environment, the regulatory environment that may result in changes to the prioritization. Are there any questions on that? No? So in terms of, I'm going to talk a little bit about what the first use case was, and really the objectives. And next slide is really about out of the box and how to stick to out of the box. So when applying the prioritization criteria, I think I mentioned that for our controlled deficiency repository, it was end of life, and it had to be replaced. And we have certain regulatory requirements to meet, specifically around Sarbanes-Oxley. The program was very mature, so we had the benefit of already having a well-established deficiency management or issue management program that included deficiencies from all sources, so internal audit, self-assess, compliance, regulators. So we knew that, and also from a controlled testing, very well-established program, well understood, methodology was well understood. So we were comfortable that by switching the technology platform wasn't disrupting the methodology or the program, and it was an easy buy-in from the stakeholders. So we looked at various modules. We made a decision to go with M6. The M7 platforms or modules that we needed not all of them were in place, and we didn't want to do half an implementation. It didn't make sense. So our first use case was the E Grc Library, again, which holds the taxonomies, the org structure. There's a number of different libraries that we're using in addition for assets, policies, financial accounts. The compliance module, which is controlled testing, issues management, and then surveys. We have a quarterly assertion that all controls and deficiencies are signed off on a quarterly basis. Again, part of that is to support our SOX requirement, and so we needed to make sure that we had that functionality. So in terms of, what did we want to get out of this? I think one of the keys for us, given that this was our first use case on a journey, we had to establish credibility, set the benchmark in terms of, yes, this works, and getting the stakeholders, they were already on board, but leveraging that, yes, we can do it, the system works, we've got the program and supporting resources in place. And the other key is to stick to out-of-the-box functionality. Again, there's real reason to do that. There's downstream impacts if you configure or customize too much. The tendency is for people to be very stuck to what they're doing today and tweaking things just to accommodate what they do today. And, so you've got to get people on board to say, encourage them that with a little bit of a process change, it can work with the supporting technology.
Yeah, and on that note, I think a lot of times people have a misconception that I'm going to implement a technology tool and it's going to automate everything, right?
Oh, yes.
100% is going to be, in the tool, which isn't the case, right?
Right. We had a number of discussions that we're not building AI here, and you still have to do your job. So, actually some of the conversations were quite remarkable because people just thought that, the technology was going to do absolutely everything for them, including we had one question last year about, well, can I use it to help do my employees' performance reviews? And I'm like, how? By the number of times they access the application. So it's really managing expectations in terms of what it's going to do for you. As I said, it's not going to do the job, and we're not building artificial intelligence here. Yeah.
Not yet.
So, yeah, and the other, I mean, obviously on time and on budget. You can imagine, because we're not a revenue generating group, it's hard to get project funding. And even that, we're in a very, budget conscious constraint environment. And so anytime you put in a proposal for project funding, it's automatically cut by 15%, which obviously you learn to game the system a little bit. But it's, very tight on money. And there's penalties for going over budget. So it was really important to, and also it established, again, as I said, the benchmark and credibility for going forward. 10 minutes left?
Time flies when you're having fun.
Okay. So sticking to out of the box, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this because I think it's really, really important. I've got the points here, but I just want to expand on some of them. The stakeholder engagement is key. So we had the benefit of being able to do a number of demos. So I will say we did do some configuration. We did a little bit of customization, but I'd say certainly compared to what CIBC has done in the past, where we take a technology, we customize it so it looks nothing like what we bought, and then we wonder why we can't fix it. We did well to limit the amount of customization. So as MetricStream started doing the development work, we had the opportunity to bring a number of the key end users in to see the get a sense for the look and feel of what they were going to be using. We talked them through what the changes were, what the impacts were, what some of the potential pain points were, and offering options in terms of how we can work around it. Also getting end users involved in your UAT is really, really important, because they're the ones, we had people that are experienced doing UAT, but they're not the end users. And we had, we benefited from having, some, we'll say, power users in that were actually able to identify a couple things that needed to be tweaked. So that is really, really key. The other thing is, again, as I mentioned, is communicate, and acknowledge the feedback. They might not always like the response back, but at least it demonstrates that you're listening and you take things into account. The other thing is, I said this a lot, was let's let the end users experience things. Let's not just have a knee-jerk reaction because one user comes back and says, I don't like it the way it does this. Let's work it out, over 3 quarters, 4 quarters. Because people were used to doing things a certain way, and there were some real changes. And let's, have them work it out. Because the tendency up front is for people to blame the technology. If something goes wrong, it's what a stupid technology. If you start peeling it back, it's actually not the technology, it's the way that they're using the technology. So maybe we need to adjust the training. So it's making sure, again, end user engagement, early demos so they can get insights into what they're doing, training, ongoing support, and making sure that you have the support mechanisms once you've gone live. Any questions on that? So I wanted just to bring up, where we had challenges with respect to out of the box. I'd say the biggest, there are two of the key ones were the compliance module, the documentation of control testing, creating the test plans, executing the assignments, documenting the results. Totally different from how our businesses were used to doing it. And right away, our tendency, I remember getting into a room and let's just scrap this and can you please rebuild it? And I sort of had an aha and said, well, that's kind of counter to what we're doing. So, we said, let's we'll take what MetricStream is offering, and we're going to walk through with some of our key control testers. So I brought in some of them and we walked through what the functionality was, and they're like, wow, we love this. And I'm like, wow, okay, that's good. So they became our advocates going forward. And yeah, you know what, there's some things along the way that, again, people have said maybe not work. But it's, as I said, it's acknowledging the change, coming up with options, letting them experience it, and explaining the why behind things. We can't just say, well, that's the way that MetricStream's built it. But particularly with the control testing, the way the control tests are documented, it actually gives way more insight and transparency into the quality of testing. It allows for greater comparability across different testing. So there is valid reason as to why it is. The other thing that proved to be very noisy was the workflow approvals. I thought it was fantastic that, you know, we have workflows, and we have, instead of people approving through emails and what have you, wow, they can go into the system and review and click, and the approval's there. It's all captured as part of the audit trail. Well, you can imagine some of the people that have to do approvals are very senior in the organization, and the feedback was, well, they're really too busy to go into the tech, you know, go in and approve. I'm like, well, you know, they're going to get an email, they can click, it'll take them in, and they can approve. Well, I can say it met with a lot of resistance, but again, part of it was maybe you didn't have the right people as approvers. You know, let's take a step back and look at, why do you have someone that reports to the CEO as an approver? They're not close enough. Realistically, they're likely not close enough to what's going on in their control environment to really assess. So again, it resulted in a number of things changing from the actual who's approving, as well as, you know, again, it's really not that bad. In the time that I've talked here, they could have done it 20 times, right? So it's changed, and people are not, you know, it's walking them through the change and the why.
Yeah, and I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I think that's extremely critical. One of the things we hear at MetricStream a lot, you know, feedback is around the approval process, right? And it's intended to have that so that you have that audit trail.
Right.
And if somebody's an approver who really shouldn't be approving, then maybe it's something you need to think about.
Exactly. So again, it's not the technology. It's, let's look at, you know, how you've set things up and who you've designated, and maybe that's where we need to make the changes as opposed to in the system. So I'd say, you know, again, we measure success by the lack of noise, and it hasn't been very noisy, which is good. Again, as with any new deployment or new processes, there are tweaks along the way, but it's, you know, I think overall it's gone really well. So I'll just go through in terms of things that we've learned. As you're going through requirements, ask more pointed questions. You know, when we say, can it do this? And the response is yes, dig a bit more, because the yes might be a yes, but. So just ask more pointed questions. Get more probing as to, I've got a point about more probing around business rationale. When the business is asking for something, a change request, rather than just saying yes, it's, well, why do you need it? We had a handful of instances as we were going through the design and build where I was getting requests, can we add this field, can we add this field? And we started, you know, going through the process of doing a change, and then I'm like, well, how are you going to use it? What are you using it for? Oh, we don't know, we haven't decided yet. So it's that kind of thing that you've got to really be, you know, be firm on, that that needs to have a valid reason and a plan for rolling it out. Because again, just because you have something in the tool doesn't mean that people are going to know how to use it or what the intent is. You know, just get better clarity in terms of what the data upload capability is. In terms of going forward, things that are sort of top of mind for me, obviously we're going to continue to leverage our learnings. Key for my team to build internal bench strength. So we are partnered both with MetricStream and Deloitte, and while I do Really enjoy working with Deloitte. I think we need to also build some of our bench strength, certainly even as we go to deploy additional use cases so that we can do more of the configuration, and particularly as we upgrade to M7 and have more ability to do configurations. The other thing is that, and again, I've sort of heard it, with the various risk assessments coming on board, got to start harmonizing what the language and the rating scales are. I'm amazed at how many different scales we have: high, medium, low, very low, low, medium, high, low, high, high, and it's red, green, blue, 1, 3, 5. It's crazy. And so that it's going to be similar to the foundational elements, probably going to be tougher because people are really stuck by their scales, but without that continuity or similarity of language, it's going to be really hard to dissect. You lose the benefit of the integration and aggregation of information if you've got the various scales. So that's probably my next big, thing to tackle, as well as the upgrade to M7. Even more focus on sticking to out of the box. So some of you may have met my colleague here, Richard, not to point you out, Richard, who is working on, he's leading the implementation of our next use case, which is regulatory change management. They're the first group that are using the risk assessment module. There were some asks, I'd say, to do some tweaking, but we had to be really careful because it's not just his team that's going to be using it, that module. Eventually, as we roll out to other use cases, other groups are going to be using it, and they would, there's a downstream impact that they would then have to live with or comply with whatever was established up front. So it's really keeping the end in mind, and not just, it's not just about the use case that you're deploying, but it's the broader picture and the direction that we want to go. In terms of benefits, certainly established credibility across the organization. There is a lot of interest in this across the organization. I'd say more so than what I expected. I get people coming and saying, well, what about this use case and what have you? So that has been fantastic. Streamlining process. The out-of-the-box reporting capability has been a huge hit, and we will continue to leverage that. So in short, I will end there. So I didn't think I was going to talk so much.
No worries. Well, thank you all for your time. We're actually right at 12:05 or so. So thank you very much. Join us next door for lunch. And Sheila, thank you so much.